Okay, creation evidences. In case you forgot from the last time, if you were here last week, this is our class, I think, number 7. We've got quite a bit more material to cover. We're still in that stage of where we're answering arguments that evolutionists make for their theory. We will get into a larger section of where we put more positive proofs for and evidences for God's creative majesty and what we see around us. Will take quite a bit more time, but still it's proper, I think, and important to, in this day and age, to examine the arguments, the best arguments that are being made by evolutionists and those that believe in the theory of evolution to support their theory. And let's read this passage here out of John 1, verse 1 through 3. This is the truth here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. That's a pretty clear statement from the scriptures. And we see that record of how things were made back in the first 2 or 3 chapters of Genesis, that it took 6 days for God to do that. And on the 7th day he rested, and that's what we believe. And we believe that because we have faith in that because of the evidence that there is to hold that reality up. You look over in Hebrews 11, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Raise your hand if you were around when the earth was made. No, nobody here. Nobody here in this room or in this town or in this whole world. Nobody was here. So how do you know what it says in Genesis chapter 1 and 2 is true? Well, we take that by faith, but that faith is based upon a conviction or proofs and evidence. Evidence of God's word that we can look at, just one thing after another that shows us without question that God's word is his inspired word. It was revealed from him, and so we can have confidence in what Genesis 1 and 2 say. But also, like we've been looking over in Romans chapter 1, God says there that we can believe that he is because of the things that were made. We can clearly see the fact that God made everything. And of course, that's what we're dealing with here now, is the creation evidences. There's months and months and years of evidences we could look at that support the scriptural proofs, but we're looking at at this particular class for things that hold up creation in 6 days, as recorded in the Bible, as being what actually did happen. Evolution, we've been looking at the evidences they put forward, and we can see really clearly those things aren't supported by evidence. They're wishful thinking, they're imagination, and they're not based in reality. So that's where we are here, and we'll go over just a quick review of where we were, where we left off last week. We're looking right now at fossil evidence. Not where we want to be. We want to be this direction. These fossils, which we put forward and established that really fossils are Earth's historical record of life. They're what you can see. If you want to know what's lived in this world, at least a lot of the things that have lived throughout time, both that are still living today and those things that are extinct, you go into the rocks and you see preserved there skeletal imprints or even full, especially if it's a hard exterior, what do you call those things that have a hard bony exoskeleton creatures? A lot of I say a lot, trillions basically of fossils, millions which have been unearthed. And so you've got all these fossils here that show one thing or another, one evidence or another. You've got, of course, what evolutionists think is that you've got all these creatures that exist today and have existed, and there's this unbroken chain of slowly transitioning creatures that had to be there if evolution gradually, slowly happened from the beginning of the first cell that was ever accidentally came into existence. You've got to find this in the fossil record. That, if you want to have evidence, if you're basing evolution off of evidence, you should find all these different trunks and branches going off into the things that are existing today and have existed previously. Our argument is you don't find that. What you find is this. What you find is different kinds of creatures. All the different fossils you find don't show any transition fossils. it shows exactly what Genesis 1 and 2 describes. Everything after its kind. Some variation, yes, but things aren't changing from previous ancestral forms or related forms into other types of creatures. Okay, and we look so far, we took this one, the evolutionist best argument for dinosaur transition into a bird. That was the Archaeopteryx, and we showed there that that simply was a bird, perching bird, wasn't a transitional species at all. And remember now, when we're looking at some of these comments that are made, and we're going to look at a lot of them, we're looking at these comments that are made by evolutionists, not creationists. It's evolutionists saying, look, this is just a bird. And look, this horse thing that we used to teach, we don't teach that anymore because now we know it's false. Or this thing about this tiktaalik, supposed transitions of form between fish and land animals. We don't believe that's a transition at all anymore. Now, mind you, we preached it for years, right? Because we believed it for years, but we realize now it's not an evidence at all. These are not true transitional fossils, and we can't find, as we'll see here, evolutionists many evolutionists admit, well, let's say a number of evolutionists, that we don't find any transitional fossils. Okay, so then we get into human evolution. Okay, that stuff isn't evidence at all. We got into evolution of humans put forth by those who believe that's how we came about. Humans evolved from a lower life form, and eventually what we have is you and me today. Read out of Miller and Levine Biology. This is a common textbook back in the early 2000s in high schools. And what they state, just matter-of-factly, says, but all researchers agree on certain basic facts. We know, for example, that humans evolved from ancestors we share with other living primates, such as chimpanzees and apes. So we know this. Case settled, no more. This is settled science. That's a common term that's used these days. Well, it's actually a religion. It's a belief. The evidence is not there. And we started looking last week. The first guy we looked at was Java Man. Okay, what about this guy? Is he the missing link? Transitional species you got to have from more ancient life forms to more modern life forms. If that theory is true, you need to have evidence in the historical record of life, in the fossils. Well, we looked and saw that it was conceded that the skull cap of this particular find was a large gibbon and the leg bone was from a modern human, and that they were found a number of yards from each other. So they conceded. Look, we know we said this for years was a missing link. Now we know it's not. Okay, Pilbeam Man. Skull was from a 500-year-old human, but the jaw was that of a modern ape whose teeth had been filed to look like human teeth. That was a hoax. It was just foisted on society because this guy wanted the glory for discovering a missing link. And it wasn't discovered till a number of years later. This is all just a hoax. Okay, we looked at Nebraska Man. When other parts of the skeleton were found in 1927, it quickly became clear that it was nothing more than the tooth of an extinct pig. They come out, so excited when they find something they think might be a missing link that they just go bazonkers, and then they spend another month or two or a couple years and say, yeah, we know it was in the New York Times and it was in, Life magazine and everything, but we were wrong. We came out too soon on this. Well, Nebraska Man is an example of that. Probably the most noted one, we looked at this last week, I think it's the last one we looked at, Neanderthal Man. A number of scientists came out as similar to Rudolf Virchow, and said who is the father of paleontology, claimed that these skeletons were nothing more than modern man with rickets and arthritis. And so you've got this particular picture they first had about what they thought this guy looked like because of their interpretation of the bones. And here another guy, Dr. C. Coring Brace, stated, West European Neanderthal man is simply today's West Europeans that had some trouble medically that made him look a little different. And this is what now they've changed the image to. I mean, this looks a lot like Randy, and so what kind of an argument are you going to make there? So, not really Randy. This guy's got to be a lot better looking, I think, than you are. Okay, we wouldn't kick around with him if we didn't love him. So the Chicago Field Museum has since put in a newer exhibition, and this is what he looks like here. So we looked at these guys. Any questions till we go on? We got about 3 or 4 more missing links that came when they came out. It's like, whoa, we found it, we found it. All the news goes out, and then retract. Okay, moving ahead. Rhemapithecus. Here's again, artist conception. Was first discovered in southwest Kenya by Louis Leakey in 1932. Hopefully Leakey is a name you've heard before. This guy's famous for his research in in fossil evidences and researching things. And he discovered this fossil. At the time, all that was found were a few teeth and some fragments of upper jaw. This is it, right here. Leakey assembled these teeth to resemble the broader parabolic shape of humans rather than the narrow U shape of apes. I mean, he took this thing here and said, yeah, I think it was like this, which would be like a human. Okay. Noted scientist Dr. Elwin Simon stated confidently, the pathway can now be traced with little fear of contradiction from generalized hominids to the genus Homo, meaning traced from back on ape-like creatures up into hominid, which is human. We've got it. We found it. In Time magazine, November 7th, 1977, he says, Rhemapithecus is ideally structured to be an ancestor of hominids. If he isn't, we don't have anything else that is. This is Dr. Elwin. I'm glad he puts that in there. If this guy's not it, we haven't found anything. He's admitting that, but he thinks he's got it. Okay. In 1976, renowned secular anthropologist Richard Leakey had this to say. The case for Rhemapithecus as a hominid, a human, is not substantial, and the fragments of fossil material leave many questions open. This is all you got. You can build a full creature out of this. Then in 1977, a full jaw of Rhemapithecus was discovered. This jawbone was the U-shaped, not the parabolic one, and so it wasn't human-like at all. Zillman and Lowenstein attempt to explain the reason for the earlier thinking of most of the world's most prominent paleontologists, and here's what they have to say. These guys are evolutionists. They say Rhemapithecus walking upright has been reconstructed from only jaws and teeth. In 1961, an ancestral human was badly wanted. We needed this, is what he's saying. We need something to support our theory. The prince's ape, as he was coined, latched onto, positioned by his teeth, and has been hanging on ever since. He's joking around. That's all they had was his teeth. His legitimacy sanctioned by millions of textbooks and Time Life volumes on human evolution. Okay, he's admitting these things. He goes on to say, oh, no, wait a minute. That was the end of that quote, I guess. He's just saying, look, this is what happened. We thought it was a human-like. Now we know it's not. It was wanted badly. And you'll see the motives in some of the things that we'll be reading about. We need to be able to support our theory of evolution, is what the feeling is. David Pilbeam, a leading paleontologist and former supporter of Rhemapithecus, admirably recanted his earlier views, commenting that a group of creatures once thought to be our oldest ancestors may have been firmly bumped out of the human family tree. So there we go. We got proof, we got evidence, everything gets printed up in all the publications, and then they say, well, no, we were wrong. Many paleontologists have maintained that Rhemamorphs are our oldest known ancestors. Just a second, I'm sorry, I'm messing up these quotes. That was the beginning of a quote. This is the end of it. Many paleontologists have maintained that Rhemamorphs, that is a type of Rhemapithecus, are our oldest known ancestors. These conclusions were drawn from little more than a few jawbones and some teeth. Truthfully, it appears to be nothing more than an orangutan ancestor. Okay, took us a while to figure that out, but does Time magazine come out and say, hey, they were wrong? It doesn't. It just doesn't happen that way. That's not the way people want this whole discussion to go. Mike has a comment back here.
It's neat that there's a few that have enough integrity to go against the grain when they see the truth. But nonetheless, he still couldn't help but put a jab in there in the last line to be nothing more than an orangutan ancestor. It's not an ancestor, just an orangutan. There's no fossil record.
True.
So anyway, appreciate it in part, but not in full.
No, I got it. Yeah, an ancestor. Right. It was a different kind of orangutan. There were plenty of orangutans. This one was extinct. Yeah, so not an ancestor. You're right. Mike, up here. Matt.
I've got it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So this is the thing that has always frustrated me with these human ancestors. Number one, the number of examples or exemplars that they have to make these generalized statements from, usually only one or two, skeletal remains of one individual or maybe just a handful of individuals.
Sometimes a few.
And yet this is supposed to be the precursor to the entire human race. It would seem like if that were the level of evolution that we were at a certain time, there would be all of these different examples all over the globe at a certain strata in the column, the geological column, but it's found in one place.
And that's what they tell you we should find.
Right. And that's the impression that they give in schools, where they're teaching young minds that don't have the capacity to search these things out more for themselves. And so it's a gross misrepresentation. They don't find these things with a little label on it that says, 500,000 BC or something on it. They derive that themselves by whatever methods they choose to use that reach the conclusions that they want to reach. And then they construct their own fantasies from these, skeletal portions. And so it's just a specious line of evidence, even from the onset.
Yeah, as we look at this, we'll be concluding with quite a lot of quotations that you got to strap in to kind of read, because you'll be pretty amazed at the admissions that are made by evolutionists that you never hear anything about. And they even say you don't hear about these. But let's look at a few more. Thanks, Mike. Here we got two more, I think. Australopithecus. Some of you maybe have heard of these if you remember your school textbooks and things, or done any research. Some of you may never have heard of them at all, but that's all right. These are the things that are put forward as being the strongest evidence for the missing link, that transitional form to humans. Dr. Raymond Dart, professor of anatomy at Witwatersrand University in Johannesburg, was the first to study these fossils. In 1924, at Tong in South Africa, Dart discovered a fossil skull consisting of a full face, teeth and jaws, and an endocrinal cast of the brain. So part of the skull was gone, so part of the brain was even cast. Okay. Dart was convinced, I love these pictures they come up with just from these small pieces of bone. Dart was convinced that some teeth were man-like and the brain was small and therefore ape-like. So thus a transition between apes and man. Okay, his opinions on the matter of this particular skull were largely scorned by the scientists of the time. Not so many people were convinced about this guy, but it's all they had of the time, who considered it nothing more than a young chimpanzee. Sir Zolly Zuckerman, an expert on Australopithecines, commented that there is indeed no question what the Australopithecine skull resembles when placed side by side with specimens of humans and living ape skulls. He continues and says, it is the ape, so much so that only detailed and close scrutiny can reveal any difference between modern ape and Australopithecine. Aussie. Okay, so he's saying, nah, you know, it's a chimpanzee, guys. As the notion of an upright posture, as the notion of an upright posture, Zuckerman said, in short, the evidence for an erect posture as derived from a study of the inanimate bones seems anything but certain. So he's just saying, look, the evidence is not there. This person, or this particular chimpanzee is that, even though he's drawn this way. Okay, the last one we're going to look at, and we're going to make some strong remarks, or at least show some strong comments by those that should know what's going on here, how to say that properly, that support the theory of evolution, but really have trouble with any of the stuff that we've been looking at. Lucy. Lucy. In 1974, Donald Johanson discovered a half-complete skeleton in Ethiopia's Awash Valley that he named after the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So Lucy. I think what happened is when they discovered these bones, they had a big party afterward in camp, singing all sorts of songs, and this one stuck, Lucy.
They were using Lucy.
I guess, okay. The specimen was only 3.5 feet tall, estimated to weigh 51 pounds, and looked somewhat like a common chimpanzee. A year later, 13 similar skeletons were found. So here's where they got a few skeletons here. Okay, he was convinced that she was in every way an ape so every way you looked an ape, except for a small fragment of knee bone, which appeared to indicate she had a tendency to walk in an upright position. So look how narrow they look at that. I mean, this is what we think, this one part of this thing, yeah, could have been an ancestor here. The problem, many tree-dwelling monkeys exhibit the same knee structure as Lucy. So what are we looking at? Lucy has so many other anatomical structures that indicate she was a tree dweller and not a land walker. Okay, Albert W. Might, evolutionist, and so on, his research, quote, the evidence given above makes it overwhelmingly likely that Lucy was no more than a variety of pygmy chimpanzee and walked in the same way, awkwardly upright on occasions, but mostly quadrupedal. The evidence for the alleged transformation from the ape to man is extremely unconvincing. So there you go. This is the best. This is the absolute best of what is put forward here, and it's just, yeah, it's just not what it doesn't pass. British zoologist, evolutionist Zolly Zuckerman declared they are just apes. And again, if you do research some of these guys, they're very well respected as evolutionists in their community. So they're just apes. Okay, some concluding quotes. What the truth about human evolution. J.W. Lowenstein and Zillman say this: imaginations run riot in conjuring up an image of our most ancient ancestor. Remember, these guys believe in evolution. That's how they think things happen. The creature that gave rise to both apes and humans. This ancestor is not apparent in ape or human anatomy, nor in the fossil record. Anatomy and fossil record cannot be relied upon for evolutionary lineages, yet paleontologists persist in doing just this. Again, I like it when these guys that spend their lives in this research are willing to come out and say, look, we've been looking for so long, it's not there. We haven't found it yet anyway. Now, you think, why don't they turn around and say, well, I believe in the Bible and God created things. And that's how things came about. And there was no evolution. Because they're still holding on. They think something's wrong here. They'll find it eventually, or the evolution or the fossil record isn't so perfect, so maybe we'll get there sometime. But this, I like it, it's refreshing, as Mike says, when they say these, that will admit these kinds of things. In 1990, Richard Leakey himself said, if pressed about man's ancestry, I would have to unequivocally say that all we have is a huge question mark. To date, there has been nothing found to truthfully purport a transitional species to man, including Lucy. If further pressed, I would have to state that there is more evidence to suggest an abrupt arrival of man rather than a gradual process of evolving. Yeah, I mean, again, this guy's not a Christian or a creationist. He's an evolutionist. He believes it all can't happen naturally, but he's being forthright about it. We don't have any evidence. Now, let me say this here, because we got quite a few quotes that we'll cover here, and some of you may fall asleep. I hope not. But quotations similar to this, where the people who are the experts in the field, who believe it with all their heart, say we don't have any evidence for it. So, this PowerPoint series you can grab. We'll have it online. Just not with my speaking, just the slides, so you can have the quotes. So that when you talk to a friend who's just entrenched in it, give him all these quotations as part of the thing. If they're so convinced, and say, look, your own guys don't think there's any evidence for it. It's a matter of faith. The difference between faith in evolution and faith in God is there's evidence for faith in God. Tremendous amount. Okay, let's keep going here. Still talking about the truth about human evolution. Fossils, okay, no, let's back up. Let me back up there. We're done with human evolution. We're going to go over some quotations by evolutionists that show what they really think, the ones that are being honest, about the fossil record, okay? Now remember, this is what's being taught. We covered a few of these things before. These basic textbooks, biology principles and exploitations, used a lot. In some schools, fossils offer the most direct evidence that evolution takes place. That's the claim. See, yeah, easy to say that. Show me the evidence. And I think what they say, well, yeah, there's millions of fossils out there. Yeah, but are there any transition ones? Well, we're still looking. Got to be somewhere, because we know evolution is true. I mean, it's that circular reasoning that just totally people get sold on. Again, another claim. Fossils, therefore, provide an actual record of Earth's past life forms. Change over time, evolution, can be seen in the fossil record. That's the claim. Okay, we've got about 19 minutes. We're going to cover as many of these as we can. Hold on. The truth about fossils from an evolution viewpoint. Stephen Jay Gould, very famous evolutionist, realized this problem. He says the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. Remember, paleontology is the study of fossils. The evolutionary trees that adorn the textbooks have data only at the tips and the nodes of the branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not evidence of fossils. He's just being so frank about it. And that's great. David B. Kitts. Despite the bright promise that paleontology provides a means of seeing evolution, it has presented some nasty difficulties for evolutionists, the most notorious of which is the presence of gaps in the fossil record. Evolution requires intermediate forms between species, and paleontology does not provide them. What? Then why is it being taught? Go ahead, Mike.
Couple of thoughts. I mean,
Yeah.
You're putting names up here that maybe people don't recognize, but since I had this jammed down my throat for 7 years of college, I mean, you're using the pillars
Yep.
of the evolutionary world, like Stephen Gould and Leakey and these guys, and
Yeah, these aren't
and so
any
when
just
he's quoting
fringe. These aren't fringe people. Yeah, these aren't fringe people at
He's
all.
not
These
quoting me.
are mainline guys. Yeah.
And secondly, are you at some time going to talk about Stephen Gould's Hopeful Monster? Or I know you have too much to cover, but you going to talk about that?
Just a little bit. We might. We can certainly.
No,
yeah.
no, it's okay. I just was curious.
Yeah, we will in a brief comment because someone mentions it also.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that a little bit. Most evolutionists believe evolution happens slowly as a gradual process of mutation and selection. Some evolutionists think it happened like, oh, there goes that species. Oh, in a couple thousand years, and we have a whole new entire creature. And that's kind of the hopeful monster, kind of like a dinosaur laid the egg and out popped a bird. Is kind of what they were leading toward. It just happened drastically fast. So that's what he's talking about, hopeful monster, and we'll see what we get into there. The thing, and that is not so much as mainline as the slow, gradual process that we're talking about here. Thanks, Mike. Did I read this one? Yeah. Moving on. And again, these are no good to you if you can't go back and look at them and use them when you want, but we'll make that available. Okay, Macbeth, and I'm not reading the whole back. These are all referenced. You can look and see. Darwinism has failed in practice. The whole aim and purpose of Darwinism is to show how modern forms descended from ancient forms. That is, to construct reliable phylogenies, which is simply genealogies of family trees. Okay, it's to construct this, and it has utterly failed. It's failed, hasn't done it. This guy believes in evolution, teaches it. So all the stuff that we don't have any evidence of this, he's saying. We don't have it. It's not there. Not only don't we have all of it, we don't have any of it. S.J. Gould and Niles Eldridge, smooth intermediates between distinct design types, I won't even pronounce the other one, are almost impossible to construct, even in thought experiments. There is certainly no evidence for them in fossil record. So he says, even when you come down to thinking about how one thing is going to transition into another, it's hard to imagine, he says, but for sure they're not in the record. There's no evidence of it. David Emerald, in the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find predictable progressions. In general, these have not been found. Yet the optimism has died hard, and some pure fantasy has crept into the textbooks. That's what's being taught, pure fantasy. No evidence. Jerry Adler with John Kerry. The more scientists have searched for the transitional forms that lie between species, the more they have been frustrated. Aren't there? Lots of people looking for them, but they're not there. Dr. Colin Patterson, this guy is amazing, was the head of the British Museum of Natural History for a number of years, and I can't remember exactly the timeline. And this museum contains over 7 million fossils. Just this one museum, 7 million fossils. In his book on the fossil record, he does not mention one single illustration of the transitional form between species. When asked about this, he replied, and he was quoted, and it's recorded, "I fully agree with your comments on the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any fossil evidence, I certainly would have included it in my book. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil which one might make a watertight argument." Not even one? Come on. We should be having a whole huge history of it, and we don't even have one.
And Bill, how many fossils would you say, because there's no fossil evidence, no chain, so how many fossils have they found of all the species put together? Would you say 10, or they found 50 fossils in the world? Or how many, if you had to take a wild guess, how many fossils have scientists found?
Well, there's 7 million here in this museum.
7 million?
Fossils.
And I own some. I've got some in my home. I
mean, no, like I said, I think
there's as common as can be, and I can't find a single link. How about that?
No, I know. There's got to be trillions of fossils. Now we're talking about even things like small, the shells, billions of shells in the oceans, and all these different. There's fossils and fossils and fossils. How many? I mean, let's see, Randy, you got an assignment. Go count all the fossils in the world. See you in 20 million years. Yeah, lots of them. Just the ones that have been recorded, though, are amazingly, millions of those have been recorded. Not one that this guy says that he can say there's any way I can say it's a transitional species. Okay, keep on going. Keep that seatbelt on. And what happened here? Let me see. Okay, next one. Stephen Jay Gould. Even though we have no direct evidence for smooth transitions, can we invent a reasonable sequence of intermediate forms that is viable, functioning organisms between ancestors and descendants? Of what possible use are the incipient stages of useful structures? And he gets into a big question we'll look at a lot more later. He says, what good is half a jaw going to do for you? And how is natural selection going to preserve that? Or half a wing. What good is that? So we can't even imagine it, let alone have it in the fossils. He's being frank and truthful about this, and that's excellent. Thomas J. Kemp. Of course, there are many gaps in the synapsid or mammalian fossil record, with intermediate forms between the various known groups almost invariably unknown. Just got one guy after another. I'm going to skip this one here, kind of go on here. I'm not going to tell you who this is until the end. Long before the reader has arrived at this part of my work, a crowd of difficulties will have occurred to him. Some of them are so serious that to this day, I can hardly reflect on them without being in some degree staggered. Why, if species have descended from other species by fine graduation, do not we everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Good question, right? Geology surely does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory. Charles Darwin, the guy that came up with the whole idea, at least who synthesized the whole thing and wrote it down and explained it. He says, yeah, this is the thing. If it looks like after years and years and years we don't find any transitional species, you got to figure I'm wrong. Well, I figure he's wrong. And I don't care if that's popular. Okay, Mike.
It has amazed me, not only do we not have these transitional forms, but they also can't answer the fact that until that transitional form actually fully transitions to another species, it is maladjusted for its environment. Mm-hmm. In other words, if a certain portion of it is changed, it's not adjusted to that change, by the rest of the organism. So if for example,
there's no benefit to either, so natural selection would not preserve it.
Right. If a reptile developed a bump on its back that's going to become a wing in 5 million years, yeah. Well, that bump on the back in the meantime is going to be a problem.
Someplace to grab onto for other dinosaurs.
So, how does it continue on to the point? That's a question that I've had as well.
You bet. And that gets a little ahead too, because we're still just looking at fossils, but that's a great point. We're going to see how that really makes a huge difference when we look at further evidence. The way this evolution thing is supposed to work in contrast to what the Bible clearly says, created everything after its own kind. Thanks, Mike. David Raup. Well, we are now so there's Darwin saying, we don't have any of these transitional species, can't find any. Well, here's the guy, says, now about 120 years after Darwin, and knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. Ironically, we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. He goes on to say, by this I mean that some of the classic cases of Darwinian change in the fossil record, such as the evolution of the horse in North America, have had to be discarded or modified as a result of more detailed information. The harder we look, the less we find. Is what he's saying there. Arian Roth. Concerning the evolution of invertebrate to vertebrate, that is to fish, we have virtually no evidence in the fossil record or elsewhere for any of the changes proposed during this immensity of time, but the public hears nothing of this problem. And that's the thing you got to realize, is that so many people out there say, well, if evolution were false, we'd hear about it. We'd hear people coming out and saying, no, you won't hear about it. Not from evolutionists, rarely from evolutionists, other than some of these fellows that we've been able to grab some of their quotations through time. Public hears nothing of this problem. Eldred J.H. Corner. To the unprejudiced, the fossil record of plants is in favor of special creation. He's not a creationist, but this is what he says. Can you imagine how an orchid or a duckweed, how an orchid, a duckweed, and a palm have come from the same ancestry? And have we any evidence for this assumption? The evolutionists must be prepared with an answer, but I think that most would break down before an inquisition. Don't got it. Put them in front of an inquisition. Bring us your best evidence. We know we can find it. That's all they'd have to say, So again, being frank and upfront and forward about this. Dr. Eben J. Ambrose, at the present stage of geological research, we have to admit that there is nothing in the geological records that runs contrary to the view of conservative creationists, that God created each species separately, presumably from the dust of the earth. Now, mind you, he doesn't believe this. He thinks something will change and he'll find something. But he says, we got the best argument. I sure appreciate his honesty. Niles Eldridge, we have proffered a collective, just a second here. Is that the same quote? No, sorry. We have proffered a collective tacit acceptance of the story of gradual adaptive change, a story that strengthened and became even more entrenched as the synthesis took hold. We paleontologists have said that the history of life supports that interpretation, all the while knowing that it does not. I mean, how do you get more incriminating than that? He's an evolutionist, has been all his adult life. And he says, we're telling people things that we shouldn't. Amazing how that happens a lot, especially, we think it's just these days. Oh, got a hand up. Bill, behind you there, Matt. I didn't see it with a light behind you there.
Well, this all overlooks the real evidence that they have, and that is, everybody knows there's evidence of evolution. And if you don't believe it, you can look in the textbooks. I mean, the textbooks claim it. It wouldn't claim it if it wasn't true.
Yeah,
and they've taught it for years. They couldn't get away with teaching that if it wasn't true. That's just not right. It's so much like, and this is all a strike at God. And it's a strike at God by people who don't believe in God or don't want to believe in God, because it would require them correcting other things in their life and changing their life, and they don't want to do that. And that's why, the newspapers, the media, they don't want it out that there is nothing there to base that theory on. And it is a theory; it's not proven, but they, by the way, does that seem kind of similar to things going on around us today?
No, not even closely.
Where they
No.
cite one another.
I know. Yeah. No.
And so
truth is hard to come by, brother.
Amen.
Examine all things, hold fast to that which is good.
That's right.
You can't swallow it hook, line, and sinker. Ain't nothing. You can't do it as far as your faith. Don't swallow what Mike Brenneman has to say from up here without checking him out. Right? Check him out, or anybody else, or me doing this. Thanks, Bill. Okay, we're almost done here. The Guardian Weekly. If life had evolved into its wondrous profusion of creatures little by little, Dr. Eldridge argues that one would expect to find fossils of transitional creatures which were a bit like what went before them and a bit like what came after. Isn't that the truth? But no one has yet found any evidence of such transitional creatures. This is quote after man, after guy, after prominent evolutionist that comes up with these things. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple. We're getting down here. I don't want to go into this next week. No, let's go on. Keep going. Sorry, bear with me. You can always look these up. Just go on and on. I have too many, I know. Keep going. If nothing else, just all these quotes going in front of you. It's pretty impressive. You got all these evolutionists that, okay, I'm going to keep going here. Hold on. Okay, sorry. Be patient with me. Okay, we'll read this last one. A major problem in proving the theory of evolution has been the fossil record. That's supposed to be their biggest case, but it's the major problem. The imprints of vanished species preserved in the Earth's geological formations. This record has never revealed traces of Darwin's hypothetical intermediate variants. Instead, species appear and disappear abruptly, and this anomaly has fueled the creationist argument that each species was created by God. You think? Why? Well, of course it would, because it's showing something that the Bible says happened. All the creatures were created after their kind. Okay, we'll take a comment or two if we can't. Back there with Andrew.
When I was teaching Genesis, I put up a whole bunch of different quotes, and back to what Bill was saying about belief and stuff, there's a Nobel Prize-winning biologist named Dr. George Wall, and he says that there are only two possibilities of how life began: spontaneous generation or supernatural act of God. Spontaneous generation would have been the first cell that created.
Accidentally.
Right. He says spontaneous generation was disproved last century, which leaves the only choice as being the supernatural act of God. I will not accept that philosophy because I choose not to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in which I know is scientifically impossible.
Amazing, yeah. Isn't that great? I need that quote. Yeah. Believe it beyond any evidence at all. Yeah, Mike?
You know, we think about the fact that this stands in opposition to belief in God and His creation, but this stands in opposition to science.
Oh, sure.
You know, I mean, this is the.
Hey, Mike, the science is settled on this.
Yeah, the science is totally upended by this.
Yeah.
Because they're spending all this time trying to make this fit, instead of accepting the fact that this 120-year-old theory or plus, you know, I mean, think of anything else that has been scientifically standing for more than 120 years.
Yeah.
You realize that Darwin, you know, just didn't have anywhere near the scientific perspective that people should have today, based on the modern knowledge that we have. But again, they're holding on to this
Fable.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next week, just to finish up with a few things, the Cambrian Explosion. Probably the most amazing thing in the fossil record that disproves evolution. Thank you for your attention. And then we'll get off to some good stuff.